Hey, welcome to the Amsoft live stream with Natasha and Bill. We're going to be answering some questions that we've accumulated lately and just generally just talking about technology and ideas around technology, technical implementations, legacy systems, and just the type of work that we do. All right, Tasha, how are you doing today?
I'm doing good. How about you?
I'm hanging in there.
It's almost the end of the week, right?
You got it. All right. Let's go ahead and get started.
Okay, I would like to say one thing. If anyone in the chat wants to ask questions at any time throughout the live stream, just ask them, and then I will ask them to Bill when we get a breaking point to ask the question. So we are perfectly fine taking questions from anyone in the audience as well. But the first question that we're starting with today is, can you talk about a success story where your services helped an automotive dealership streamline their operations and improve efficiency?
Sure. So we've done quite a bit of work in the automotive industry, and some works that we've done with the dealers are majority around integration, which I think our space as a whole is kind of moving into that. There's a lot of software packages that solve particular problems really well. One of the issues that we see mostly is along the line of integrations with other systems. So some of the successful service implementations we've done is basically wiring up a DMS to speak to dynamic CRM system. So what that entailed was basically we used Azure Functions as a push from Dynamics, and then that was translated and read from the DMS, and it was basically to help the sales team in the organization take their opportunities or customers that they're trying to contact or new sales that they were trying to work, and integrated that better for them, so that they were able to do follow-ups and that kind of work more efficiently, basically. So a lot of times you'll go into an organization, automotive, pretty much any industry, and you'll see a lot of I don't want to use the word piecemeal because they're fully functional products, but I'll have this type of accounting system. I'll have this type of Microsoft Dynamics or Salesforce or some other type of CRM, and these systems aren't directly talking together.
Mm.
They're not sharing data, so you'll get a lot of duplicate data entry. I have to put it over here, and then I have to go over to the opportunity record over here. That a lot of that can be handled with processes or setting up your processes and procedures correctly. If you want to go that route, you don't have to have a technical solution. But for me personally, I think the computer is a little bit better at keeping data similar, or not similar, keeping data the same between the systems, because you're basically just copying data and putting it somewhere else. Where if I have a human who's typing in the data into two different systems, maybe they misspell a word, and now all of a sudden this organization name doesn't match this organization name over here, and so the records don't match, and so you don't get your data going together. So typically in situations where we see dual entry, we'll do some type of integration to eliminate that kind of keep the data a little bit more consistent.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's always helpful for companies if you can take away some busy work because it's always the work that no one wants to do, right? So it's like passing it off to whoever will do it. And then if you can just get the computer to do it for you, then you don't have to worry about that.
Yeah, 100%. It reduces cost too, and another one of the unfortunate side effects is it can also reduce overhead, which is great from a business perspective, but not so great from a personnel perspective. So
Yeah.
I kind of want to make sure that the value that you add to an organization isn't dependent on duplicated work.
Yeah.
So I mean, I just as like a general warning, I typically try not to position myself where my main function is duplicating data between two systems. Eventually someone's going to come in and say, why don't we just have the computer do that, and then unfortunately you're going to kind of be out of a job. So make sure your value add is there on top
Well,
of duplicate entry.
yeah, I think we're seeing that a lot more too with like the tech layoffs and with like AI coming into it. And there's some people who are like not even trying to use AI in their systems, but there's other people who are like trying to use as much as they can to like
Yeah, yeah.
streamline and cut costs. And it's just important, I think, to make sure that there's something that you're doing that like maybe a computer wouldn't be able to do better than you.
Yeah.
I could do that sometimes. Our computers get smarter though.
I mean, the interesting thing about that note is our function as a business is to basically get in and then get not fired, but
Yeah.
when we're done, we go away.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
so we're kind of a king in the space of we're gonna come in, we're gonna solve a problem, and we're gonna tell you how we solve the problem, then we're gonna train the people that we need to train to on our solution, and then we're gonna let you guys run with it, and most likely there won't be any issues. But if you have issues, give us a call back, or you want to update or upgrade or something like that. So I think that's kind of important too in the
Yeah.
consulting space. Your job is basically to write yourself out of a job.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, so eventually it ends, I always keep that top of mind too. I try to write my code and structure my solutions in a way that's easy for other people to understand and that I can hand off. Because I got to be honest, I like solving problems, and once I solve the problem, I do like doing the work, but it's definitely not as enjoyable as figuring out how we want to apply the work. So
Yeah. I think that's why development as a service is really gonna be the future of things too, because a lot of the time I feel like more and more companies are realizing that they don't wanna have a whole team to just work every so often to do certain things for their development software or their custom software that they may be using, but they need someone who can come in and who's, like, okay with the fact that, like, maybe after they finish the solution that they're not gonna be keeping them under payroll anymore. Like,
sure, sure. Yeah, I think development service is going to be a big deal. I also like the mental shift in expertise. So let's just say I'm a startup. We found a niche. We hit well, we are a startup, but let's just say
yeah.
we're like a startup company, and let's just say we have a product and we sell widgets. And our primary focus is around developing and selling this widget, whatever it is. And I think companies instinctively want to go back to their core set of functionality, and a lot of small companies that are growing, turning into medium or large sized businesses, think, oh, I need a developer. And yeah, it's true, you do need a developer, but there is infrastructure around development.
Yeah.
You can't just, I mean, there's a lot of senior developers. I'm one of them. They could just come in and just do the whole thing. I can do the project planning, I can do the requirements, I can do the user stories, I can do the interviews. I know how to do all that process, but less seasoned developers may not have been in that position. They may have just been in a place where my job all day is, Bob tells me to write this code and I go write this code. And then Bob tells me the next thing to do. And that's how a lot of organizations grow. And you don't have the infrastructure around development. And then you start getting systemic problems, you get fatigue, and eventually you're basically, a lot of companies will burn out their developer, and then the developer leaves, and then you basically have no one who understands kind of what was built. And that's one of the services we offer. I think it's a big deal that a lot of, you know um, as you go up the stack, right, in the hierarchy of the organization, you have, the management layer, development manager, team lead, whatever you're calling that particular situation. And maybe you
Mhm.
have the VP layer, and you have your VP of technology, and then you have your CTO, and then eventually your CTO. As we go up the stack, that the mystification, the magic of this system starts to get more and more blurred, to the point where the upper executives really don't have, and nor really should they, but they don't understand what software is doing fully in the organization. I think more organizations need to take a look and get a better understanding of not only the process around development, but more around what your architecture looks like. What trade-offs did your team decide on when you were making that product that you're unaware of, and you go to do this new feature, and then all of a sudden they're like, well, that's going to take a long time because we made this decision way early on, and the
Mhm.
architecture is not going to scale or move easily in that direction. And so I, as a company owner, and kind of driving and trying to push people to understand a couple of things. One of them is the development of the service is kind of pulling development out of your organization and handing it over to people who specialize in that function related to an organization. We're going to give you all of the information that you need in order to understand what we've done. and maintain it and have it, and then you get the documentation, you get the meetings, you get all the details, and they just it so they know, and so they know what type of decisions we've made, and they know what type of resources they need. And that's it. We're not in a partnership, and we're kind of on call. I like that model too, right? I especially like one of the things that we do at Atmosoft is kind of a cloud model around personnel, right? So when I start a project, what I need my architect for the solution. I need my project manager to work with us to help map out the project, and communicate with the client, and get all that upfront work done. But at that time, I don't need the team. I don't need to be paying for 3 other developers who are basically going to be doing nothing the first couple
Yeah.
of weeks, and my QA analyst who's going to be doing nothing the first couple of weeks. I know a lot of organizations kind of do. I won't call it fill-in work, but it kind of seems like that, right? In between major pushes or major features or major updates, your team's kind of idle, and so the idea behind that is if you kind of use development as a service, you can come in with a feature, do the feature. Maybe it takes 6 months, maybe it takes three, maybe it takes a year, and they come in and they do the work, and then they step back, and then the company evaluates and kind of sees how that feature is, and they're like, oh yeah, that one worked well, so now we need to do Y. And then you recontact that, and during that period where you're not where you're evaluating the ROI on the solution, or what the solution offered for you, or helped your business with, to see like, hey, was that an effective strategy? Did we meet customer needs? Are we getting higher retention? Is our churn rate down? Whatever the goal was for a particular feature or a fix, and you're evaluating that. The teams kind of go into this slowdown phase where they're fixing some bugs, and they're kind of doing some other things, and they're kind of keeping the ball rolling. But I mean, you kind of don't need to be paying for those resources during that time period before you have kind of your next major push. Maybe you did a quarter 1 push, and now you're looking at, okay, we're going to start this next project in quarter 4. Well, 2 and 3, you're still paying for those resources full time. And I'm not saying they're not working, they're probably doing valid work, but do you really need that expense? And as our economy contracts, which you could read the experts or whatever, there's arguments all the way around. I am seeing contraction, me personally. It definitely feels like we're going into an economic slowdown, and so that kind of means that, like, you really need to be aware of where your pennies are going,
Yeah.
and pennies, dollars, whatever. And so yeah, so I agree with you. I think development and service is a big deal. I'm super excited about it, and I would like to see if Atmosoft can be at the forefront of pushing this new model. And that, a lot of companies get scared because what they see is, oh, I'm bringing in this external resource, and they're going to get all this domain knowledge, and they're going to get all this application knowledge, and then they're not going to be around. But to be honest with you, the way that Adamsoft views it is, we want to form a partnership with you. We want to partner with your organization. We want to be the teams, or whatever you need to go in and attack from a technological standpoint, whatever problem or business problem that you're trying to solve. And we want to be the people that you come to when you need that help. So I think if we could shift the thinking from, this is a external organization, they're going to have all of our information, and no one internally is going to understand what's going on, to more of a, hey, we're partners, we're just your external development team. And it's more cost effective, and it's more scalable, to be honest with you. I can get technology resources, networking, programming, project management fast. Like, I already have them, and
The people
yeah,
to
and
get them that.
I have the expertise to know if they're going to solve your problem.
Yeah.
There's another problem you have when you're just hiring internally. Maybe you hire this hotshot guy, and he's a development manager, and he comes in, he says all the right things, but when he goes to hire, does he actually have the technical knowledge to know that, oh, this guy looks like a Python rock star on paper, but but can he actually ask the kind of detailed questions to get down to whether this particular Python developer is going to be able to do your Flask API or pieces like that? And we have all that expertise. And I know you can outsource that piece too. You can outsource that to a recruiting company.
Mhm.
But again, you're kind of still running into the same situation. There's an awesome company that I did some work for out of Salt Lake called STG. They're basically a staffing agency, and I know a lot of their one of the hardest interviews ever that I did next to when I attempted to try to work for Microsoft.
Yeah.
And I passed and I got hired, which was nice. And but these are like high quality people, but the their interview process was a little bit better than most in that there was actually a technical person that gave me a very intense technical interview over Angular. That one was difficult. They asked me some questions that I was not aware of on some really advanced Angular configurations and command line tools that you could use and that kind of stuff. So, but they do a good job. But a lot of other recruiting companies, it's the recruiter looking at the resume and then asking some questions, and then they throw it over. They don't throw them, but they
Yeah.
oh, here, talk to this guy, and then it's the company's job to figure out if that particular consultant is going to fit in that particular scenario. And I think I don't. It's not necessarily a mistake. It's obviously kind of working, but I think that whole process can be optimized by having people that are just nose deep in the industry and nose deep in business problems and just coming in and saying, this is the guy you want. Like I'm gonna bring this guy on my team and he's gonna get it done because I know he can get it done.
Yeah.
And you can't necessarily say that about the hiring manager or HR manager or the recruiter. Well, I'm not saying they don't know their job, but they've been
They
tightening the
were busy studying something else, not
yeah,
code or stuff like that.
yeah, exactly. So yeah, so that was a good comment.
Yeah, I also think that it's important to realize that you're already kind of doing this outsourcing, whether it's with your IT people who come in and do your network, like passwords and stuff like that, or it's like you said, a recruiting company that you go to find people to hire. Like you're already outsourcing in different elements, so why not for development?
Yeah. Why not just outsource the whole thing? Have weekly, daily check-ins, whatever the client wants. Like you want to
Yeah.
check in daily and see our progress. Let's do that. Let's have daily meetings and they're called. A lot of times teams will adapt Scrum, and so
Mhm.
they'll be scrumming, and the client's always welcome to attend. With weekly demos and that kind of stuff to see the state and the progress. I've seen that work really well. I've seen it not work so well. I mean, it mostly just depends on the implementation and the problem you're trying to solve. But a lot of times you can you can integrate fairly deep in the company as long as the company is giving you the right people that you need to be talking to for the company to be as aware or more aware in I feel in this particular case would be more aware of our progress and the kind of tasks that we're taking. I think that as a development and service company, one of our primary responsibilities is making sure that the customer is 100% satisfied and 100% understands exactly what we're doing. Like and that's what we do. This is the problem we want to solve, and then we come back and we say, okay, we have option one at a cost of Y, option two at a cost of Z, option three at a cost of A, whatever, and we can provide you with options, and I think that's key too, because a lot of times you'll get organizations that have a very good um, lead technical software guy, but that guy may not necessarily be a an architect. He may claim to be an architect, and there's no real clear definition. So that it makes this comment kind of problematic. But they may be an architect, but I'll tell you from my end, I know networking, I know project management, I know how to run a business, I know reporting, I know databases, I can program in at least 6 different languages fluently. I'm not sitting here trying to brag, but I've put in my time to get this information. And if you don't have someone who is aware of the full scope of the picture, I do production deploys most of the time for most companies I work with. That I don't toss my work over to the aside from the government. The government works way different, but
Yeah.
the government's kind of a whole entire different
Yeah,
animal.
yeah, that's a whole different industry.
Corporate customers that I work with, it's not just, I have a build, throw it over the fence, and someone else takes care of the problem. That's not how it works. I maintain the production environment. I set up the different staging and test environments, configure them, secure them, make sure everything's up, and figure out how we're going to transition from staging to production, because sometimes that can be kind of a process. And then what the not the rules, but what the process should be in a release, and the different kind of things. You need to have a full understanding of the full life cycle. If I come in and I'm a super architect and I know all the patterns, I'm up to date on all the latest greatest stuff, and we're going to create these super super tiny microservices that do these very discrete units of work. Which, by the way, Azure Functions are super great for that. Like I love Azure Functions, and in AWS they're called Lambdas. Those are great little kind of, you can just pop up some code that just does one very specific thing, and then you can get some great features in your application. You can kind of get a cloud hybrid application going, which is definitely not a bad model. And but anyway, and they need to understand the complexities of that deployment. And you really don't understand the complexities of that deployment until you've had to set up 25 microservices all connected together, all with perfect configuration files. And there's optimizations you can do there to reduce the load and the risk on that. But just speaking in generally, if I'm deploying 25 microservices and then making sure all of them can talk together and they're all talking to the dashboard to do their type of real-time reporting metrics that the company's interested in seeing about these particular services, that's a complex deployment. You can throw in Docker. That makes it even. Actually, Docker makes it a little bit better, but it is a little more complex, right? Because now you're dealing with containers that have
Yeah.
microservices that are hosted on an OS that's in the cloud. There's a lot of complexity there, and I think a lot of times architects will come up from the development stack, and they'll have really solid understanding of the development stack, and they'll have really solid understanding, good understanding of software patterns. But I think a lot of more senior people that I've met don't have much, on the metal, kind of running around with, the idea looks great on paper, works great on your development machine, but when you go to deploy that, you can run into a lot of problems. And so
Yeah.
I think a good architects, and I've met many, will take that whole scope into picture, or that whole thing into the whole scope of the whole project, is not just writing the code. Right,
Yeah.
writing code it's difficult for sure. It takes time and stuff like that, but that's not the whole picture.
Yeah. I think it's also important to like clarify that just because it's getting outsourced, at least to us in our case, that does not mean you have less control. That does not mean you can't have as many meetups as you want. We are very adaptive to the client and what they're requesting. And the main thing that we're trying to provide is that translation between the technical people and the like C-suite people who might
Yeah,
not like know all the jargon. And
yeah,
that's what we're trying to fill is that gap.
yeah, yeah. And then if I sit there, and I did a post today. Someone made a comment about, what were they saying? Oh, they were saying that developers should be talking to the customer directly,
Yeah.
and I was like, okay, I agree in theory, right? In theory, that comment was correct. That posting was correct, and I think more developers do need to have some introduction to the customers, whether that's internal or external. I think it's good for the developers to hear the feedback directly. But I also know for a fact that if I go in and start talking about cyclomatic complexity of the code, and redoing the APIs, and reducing the denormalizing the database, to kind of streamline things, or improve the indexes on the queries, 99% of people aren't going to have any idea what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
But a lot of developers, when the customer says, well, here's the problem, the developer says, oh yeah, and here's why. And the why that the developers speak at is not the same level as say a C-suite, or a customer or something like that. And you got to be cognizant of that. That can for sure be trained. I used to do the same thing when I first started out. I would come in and say, oh yeah, we need to index this and view that, and optimize the code here, and need to refactor this, and you really got to help developers improve their understanding of their target audience when they're speaking.
Yeah, I also think that it's a problem because, like, when you're doing boot camps or you're studying on your own or you got your knowledge from going to college or whichever way, what all of your studying and time goes into you understanding those things so you kind of forget where, like, the layman's terms would be, like, how everyone else is gonna understand it, and I don't know, at least from my experience, I don't think there's really classes that teach you how to talk to an end user, like, or how to get the information from the end user that you need to understand what needs to be done. Like, there's ways that you can kind of work around it and figure it out, but I never had a specific class that, like, taught me these are the type of questions you should be asking, and this is how you figure out if this is what they want or if that's what they want, especially because sometimes they're not even completely sure what they're looking for until you get into it.
Too is that they may tell you a problem. When you start digging into it, you realize like that is not the issue. That,
Yeah.
that is not the issue that you want to solve based on how you're talking to me. I know that you have this idea that the issue is here, but it's actually over here, and we need to do this work over here, and it will resolve the problem over here. And a lot of times you got to dig, you got to get digging, and you got to dig deep for that. I saw another post from another guy that was basically saying you don't have to worry about AI because then the customer would actually have to be able to tell us what they want. I found that humorous
Yeah.
from a technical perspective because I've dealt with that a lot. And that's okay. It's not their job to know where
Yeah,
the
it's not.
problem actually is. That's our job, but it is
Mhm.
also our job to communicate that back to them. So communication is super important. And if you don't know how to speak to a customer or tailor your knowledge and present it in a way that you're communicating to your audience. When I'm giving a talk and I go out and I'm giving a speech here included, right? I'm constantly evaluating what words in my head that I want to be using because I want to hit the target audience. I don't want to speak in my developer specific language because I'm not talking to a group of developers right now, right? We're talking to a broader audience. So, and my job is to take complex technical ideas and try to present them in a way that other people can understand.
Yeah, I feel like a lot of us as developers just get so used to talking to computers or other people who understand computers that we forget how to talk to, like, our other people who are not developers.
Yeah. Calls you up and says my computer's doing this, and you're like, "Oh, did you flash the ROM?" Or
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
refeed your BIOS? Did you update it? And everyone's like, "Bio what?"
How do I even what is a BIOS?
Yeah, don't turn your computer off while the BIOS is updating, or everything will go to crap.
Yeah, yeah. Well, there's a reason most people don't build their computers from scratch.
I don't do the hardware. Like I can do it. I absolutely can. I know where all the components are. I can build them up. But I just like buying something as packaged. And if I have a problem, hey Dell.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I have a
Like,
warranty.
hey Best Buy, did you figure out why this keyboard stopped working on my laptop? Yeah, I don't. That is. I have much respect for people who do that for their day to day job. That stuff can get
Stressful.
complicated and super frustrating. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Alright, well, let's move on to our next
Yeah.
question, so at least we have 2 questions in this one meeting. But, the next one is, how does Atmosoft ensure the quality of its software development and documentation services? Can you share some of the best practice or standards that your team adheres to?
Yeah. Okay. So this one, that's a really good question, and it has some complexities to it
Yeah,
in the fact that it kind of depends.
yeah.
So at Atmosoft, we always strive to deliver the best that we can within whatever given constraints we have. Maybe we have a project budget limit, maybe we have people limit, maybe we have the time limit, and so we ensure quality internally by doing testing. Now, particularly with QA. And so we will write code. We will have meetings. So we'll discuss with our QA team, and then once we're about ready to ship software, we'll push it over internally to our internal QA team. Sometimes if the customer, we do it every time. And so that kind of adds a little bit of cost, and some projects are not complicated enough to kind of warranty that cost. In that case, we'll do we'll usually do pair developer testing. What I mean by that is, I write it, and then another one of our associates, Brandon, would go in and debug it and test it,
Mhm.
or we would throw it over to maybe the project manager and have them run through and make sure everything's good. So it depends, and I'm not sold on I need QA all the time. Like
Mhm.
and everything has to be QA'd to perfect utmost expectations. Definitely, I'm not saying we reduce quality, but we definitely reduce based on customers' tolerance to a particular issues. If your website has to have a guaranteed uptime of 99.99%, right? That's going to involve, you're going to be putting more money into QA because everything has to work. Oh, sorry. It, everything has to work. Everything has to work with within logical constraints, right? If the customer has zero tolerance for error, then we're going to funnel more resources into QA and make sure that gets taken care of. Documentation is a little bit harder. Okay, so documentation would from a QA perspective, right? I don't want to do a systemic diagram of a system and say, okay, say we have a web server, we have 4 Azure, we use AWS today. We have 4 Lambda functions that are part of the solution, and then we have a Postgres database that we're feeding data into, Cosmo, Mongo, whatever you want to use on that end, right? I don't want to do a diagram where I say that it's the web server and the Postgres database, right? Because we have a workflow that comes in, and maybe it goes to this Azure function. This Azure function does Lambda does a bunch of work, and then it kind of moves down the chain, right? So the user submits a request. It's going to work through these Azure functions. Each one of the functions are going to do a particular task, and when it's done, everything kind of gets written to the database, right? If I forget to put in that there's the Lambda functions in between the web application and the database, that I would consider that a kind of a documentation bug, for lack of a better word, and that can cause problems. So the QA with documentation is more around communicating with the stakeholders in the organization, and then communicating with other members on the team to make sure that the documentation is basically 100% correct. One of the other problems that comes up with documentation a lot of the times is, as soon as you write it, it's out of date. So I prefer personally to do user stories and requirements up front, what we want to do, and then do an architecture overview document. This is the 2, 3, 4 solutions we're offering you with associated costs, and this is how we think it should be architected, and then we kind of get in and we start doing the work, and then once we've gotten to the point where we're near alpha, the system isn't changing a lot. We're more doing kind of you can have a structure like the outside of a car, right? And I'm putting the engine in, and you could be working on the engine, but the outside of the car is not going to change. That makes sense, right? So that's done, and so at that point, you can start solidifying your documentation and incorporating any changes that have happened during your architecture and development phases. But I'm not a huge fan of kind of documenting as you go, because I kind of feel like that's kind of duplicating effort. I think you get a general idea, you build your frame, and then once you have your frame, you put on your paneling, and then when you start getting into the engine, and you're kind of building the guts and the frame of the car, and the structure of the car is pretty much sound and staying there, then I think you start kind of reevaluating, well, we were here, where are we now? And then you start producing that documentation. But I think as far as QA on documentation goes, I think the best way to do it is basically through communication internally with the team, or externally with the stakeholders, so everyone kind of has a general idea of the overall kind of documentation landscape, what the system is doing. We have this page, it's doing XYZ, it's meeting this requirement, and that kind of thing.
Yeah, I also think the fact that we have usually multiple developers working on it, so we have peer reviewing happening quite often, also helps us ensure the quality with that. But let's move on to the question that was asked in the chat, which is, how does Atmosoft ensure their customer they are getting the best solution for their problem? With the pace of technological innovation, what is to keep your solution from being outdated shortly after deployment?
That's a really good question, Charles. So here it's another kind of one. That's a really good question, though, but it is a little tricky. So here's how that works. Is number one is if I'm a company and I'm an organization, as soon as my system is deployed into production, it's outdated. It's already done. There's already a new version of .NET. There's already a new way to do REST. There's already a new software architecture pattern out there that solves the problem slightly better. So the question is kind of taking, in my mind, is kind of taking a snapshot in time where when I develop solutions for companies, unless a company is directly asking me to be on the technical edge, we're going to be a little bit back. You always should be a little bit back. All the stuff on the edge is new. There's no for example, on the new thing I was working the other day, I'm working on a project where I'm trying to use computer vision to identify playing cards, right? It's just something I was interested in doing, so I started building that together. There's not a ton of information out there, so I ran into some problems that I didn't really know how to solve, and Google didn't know how to help me solve it. And so you run into a lot of scenarios there where that can end up being a significant cost sink. It's trying to figure out and work around particular issues on new technology. So typically, one of the ways that doesn't answer the second part of the question, but one of the ways we kind of avoid those edge case problems or avoid those, we're walking on Mars kind of issues is to kind of be a little bit back from the front runner of technology. Because there's always the new hottest thing, right? There's always, Angular and then React and then Vue, and there's always a new latest thing. And they may have some benefits, but the problem is the technology tried and true has been deployed into production. Is it licensed for production, or is it more of in a beta alpha phase? And you don't want to get into making those kind of mistakes. But there's some core fundamentals around software development and architecture that kind of keep your solution from being directly outdated. I would even say you could not be outdated with even doing legacy type work. So customer comes to us and wants to do something in web forms because they want it to. I wouldn't recommend this, but if they were really like, yeah, we want this whole new website to be done in ASP.NET web form because that's what we want to run and we love it, and everything else in the order. I don't think any customer would say that, but it was a good technology at the time. Don't get me
Yep.
wrong, but there's definitely some issues with that particular stack. But it's also like 20 plus years old. So
Yeah.
anyway, yeah. So we could design that solution, and you design it using the current best practices. Now, best practices are not necessarily are not necessarily the latest technologies, right? But they're the current best standard in ideas. I have this particular problem, and we're going to solve it with these particular technical patterns. And so that may be that you do the ASP.NET web forms because they ask for it, but it's all HTML and JavaScript, no code behind, right? Code behind pages are not awesome. Like they work, but I just the pattern, we found a better way to do it. And that better way is we're just going to have the web page be the web page, and then we're going to use this cool thing called Ajax and JavaScript, and then we're just going to send data back and forth between us and the server, and then we're going to update the UI, using jQuery or something like that. And you can do all that in web forms, even though it's an older technology stack. I'm utilizing that stack because that was a requirement. But I'm kind of breaking out of that stack a little bit, and I'm not using some of the features of that stack. Like I'm not using the code behind model. I don't have when I click a button, I have a server event that's getting fired. I'm doing all HTML, JavaScript, CSS, jQuery, that kind of stuff, and I'm using more modern techniques to communicate within that older stack. So that's one way we kind of avoid a company from having a technical solution that's outdated is by using the current best practices. So if those best practices are the industry as a whole has kind of decided that code behind pages are, we had them, at the time they were kind of revolutionary, but we've kind of evolved away from that pattern. So we'll implement more of those patterns on that side.
Yeah. I also think that goes into what you said in our last live stream, where it's like it's not always bad to have a legacy system. Like sometimes that is just what like your system works on, and there's a bunch of things that just would take way more time and way more money to like move away from. So instead, let's use the practices that we've learned from all the years of experience with coding and with the computers and make it so that it's as optimized as it can be with the
Yeah,
current
yeah,
restrictions.
with current understanding of technology and technological stacks or technical stacks, and yeah, 110%. That's exactly correct. And so you can work within those frameworks, and you can also break out of those frameworks a little bit and kind of do things with ways that we found that work a little bit better. Yeah, for
Yeah.
sure.
Yeah.
So that's definitely one of the ways we do it is we try to. I would think of. I wouldn't really consider anything outdated, but I would try to, think about the technical pattern around whatever solution I'm providing. Obviously you have constraints that get fed into deciding how you're going to solve a particular problem, or and then the money, time, resources, all those things got to be taken into consideration. And so maybe the whole team is, they're all ASP.NET web form experts, and that's what they do is just ASP.NET web forms every day. And so I'm not going to come into that company and say, we need to do Python.
Yeah.
We're going to put up a Flask API layer with Python, and that's going to be our breakout API. That's not good for the organization. If you know what, chances are the web form guys might not want to learn Python. And we've gotten to a point which is really awesome in the industry where we can kind of be language agnostic. Like I can have a team that's doing work and they're doing their work in Java. I can have a team that's doing their work in Python. I can have a team that's doing their work in .NET. And all those teams can talk together because we solved the application talk together with HTTP and REST and JSON, right? If everyone says, anybody who wants to connect to my system, we're going to talk over HTTP and we're going to use JSON. Then now all of a sudden, all these systems can exchange data, and all those systems, separate pieces, become kind of black boxes. I don't really need to know how the Python guys did their work, right?
Yeah.
I just know that I'm going to hit this endpoint, I'm going to pass it these data elements, and then I'm going to get this back as a result. Or it's going to go off and do some kind of work. Maybe Python in particular is a great language. It's a great utility language, and it's kind of it's the foundation of most of the machine learning, right? The libraries in Python are amazing. Like I go into Python and I'm like, oh, I need to read a PDF file. Bam, I'm done, and I can read a PDF file. I go into .NET and I have to find this library, and that one costs money, and this one is free, but I can't access the form elements in the page. And then, oh, my friend recommended this library up on NuGet, but it's a lot harder to do that work when all I want to do is read the data out of the PDF,
Yeah.
right? So I can throw up a Python service. It'll take a PDF file and just return me all the form elements in kind of a JSON dictionary kind of way, right? Where customer name Bill Moore, and I get that data back, and then it took me 5 minutes to write it versus trying to struggle with that in .NET. That can be a challenge. Working with Excel files is kind of the same thing. I don't understand how Python nailed working with Excel files, and .NET, who is owned by Microsoft, you're opening up Excel instances on the server, and you got 40 instances of Excel exe because you're not supposed to open up an instance of Excel to read the file on the server. It's multi-threaded, and then Python's like, oh yeah, here's all the data from the Excel document, and you're like, oh, okay, thanks Python. So there's different things like that you could do too. And I do like the fact that we're kind of moving into this language agnostic. I kind of think that I'm a developer, obviously. I'm an architect, obviously, but I kind of think of myself as a kind of a problem solver, and then all my programming stuff is kind of my toolbox, right? So I'm like, yeah, I need to read a PDF file. Let's get this Python thing hosted so we can read these PDF files a little bit easier.
Yeah, because they're like all tools in a toolbox rather than I specialize in Python, so that's what I'm going to try to do everything in. Like sometimes there's just a better use case to use like C# or something else than
Java, and whatever. Yeah, and then as long as you build it with, if my whole project is going to be Python, and I don't have any exposed entities or endpoints or that kind of thing, then that's fine. But if at a later date organization or your application structure is going to change where other people need to consume that, you can just slap something on the front of it, Flask for the API stuff for Python, or I should say I believe it's Flask. I've done APIs in Python a couple times. But you throw Flask, or you throw up Django, which I think is I think it's not a CRM. It's like not an ORM either. It's basically like a web, and it's all kind of drag and drop and stuff like that. And so you can do that, and then later on you can kind of evolve it and kind of slap an interface on it. As long as that interface is understood by Java or C# or F#, or whatever language I'm working, you could easily consume that data, and then you can evolve your application out that way. Maybe we're in an area, and maybe we're not a fully remote company. We're more comfortable with people being in the office, which is fine. That's cool. I like remote. Remote's kind of I enjoy the flexibility offered in being remote, but I also understand that companies want people to come to the office, and maybe in a particular area. You have a lot of big organizations or companies, and that primary area and the development talent that they've attracted to that area is all focused on one particular technology. And you have a solution that was developed in Python, and you want to do some more work, and you're having trouble finding Python people, and only Python people you can find are remote, and you really want someone in the office. Well, you can nowadays, especially, you can just again slap that interface on there, and then you kind of set up another team that's kind of more local to your area. So there could be geographic reasons to make that choice, that kind of thing. Like for example, I had a company here. I am in Smithfield, Utah, which is about an hour and a half north of Salt Lake City. And there's a company in town. They were having a hard time finding local architects, like software architects that could do the architect work. So they reached out to me, and we had some conversations, but they basically told me, like, we've been trying to fill this position. We want someone in the office, and we've been trying to fill this position for like 4 months, and we just can't find it. Logan's kind of small, so
Yeah.
it's smaller-ish. We're pretty far away from major interstate, and so there is local talent here. There's really good talent here, but they were saying, like, we just can't find anybody that that can come in and kind of do the architecture work, or help us understand how our systems are configured, and ways that we can improve it or make it faster, and that kind of thing. And they were that particular company was kind of cross technology stacks too. I know they had some .NET, and there was some Python, and I think there was some Ruby. So they kind of had kind of a mix of solutions. But again, nowadays we can just slap an interface on it and then go to town.
Yeah. All right. Do we want to wrap it up since we're at 48 minutes?
Yeah, I probably should wrap it up. So.
Okay.
All right. So yeah, we're gonna call it for today. Thank you everybody for attending. Thank you, Charles, for participating and asking a question. That was awesome. Very hard question. Thank you very much. And good questions. And we'll be back tomorrow live. We have some more questions. If you come up with any more questions, feel free to DM us on our organizational pages, or message me on LinkedIn, or message Tasha on LinkedIn, and get your questions in, and we'll get them answered. I'm happy to help. As you can probably tell, up to this point, 6 episodes in, I love talking about technology.
Yeah.
I love solving problems, and I love figuring out unique solutions to solve problems using technology. So
yeah, we're here to try to not gatekeep information. So if we can give you some, let us know.
Yeah, happy to help. So I hope everyone has a great Thursday, and we'll see you tomorrow. And goodbye, everybody.